Greetings, everyone. We're back with De'Amon Harges on the To Be and Do podcast. We're talking about, my friend, the genuine article roving listener, the original roving listener, the man who continues to teach so many of us so many lessons. And De'Amon, in our first broadcast, in our first podcast, we talked a lot about philosophy and the importance of social banking and imagination being a currency. But we didn't talk a lot about your history or about Broadway Church. And maybe you could tie those two together. Tell me, for instance, how the Learning Tree got its name and how you were connected with Broadway.
Okay. Well, we can start out by saying 1,000 years ago we were slaves. Anyway,
Good.
um, so what I'm saying is partly I think it is important to one of the practice that I learned along the way is the importance of learning people's birth story. That's which is our formation space. And so for me, I joked and said it's the long story, but I'm going to start with my grandparents. I can go a little bit further. My mother's parents and my dad's parents escaped the brutality of the South and ended up in the brutality of the North and South here
Yes.
in Indiana. And I like to say this is that during the time they moved, there was a place they called Beck's Lake. It was the swamp, and it was where the Kankakee River ended. And so they lived in a swamp. And, you know, I hear people say drain the swamp, but the swamp but God made the swamp. So that meant it was good. But in that same community, it's across the Linden Avenue is where the hospital I was born in would dump its biohazard. And
Oh,
adjacent to that was the city dump. And I noticed it is recorded to be true. But I used to hear my uncles as they used to go pick up there was a man that lived right next to the lake in the shed and he was collecting metal. He would pay them a nickel to go bring a bag of metal and they would walk over to discarded needles, the biohazard. Needless to say that the city of South Bend didn't treat those black folks as if they were sacred. But the story that I really come to hold on to is my granddad was an artist, a quartet singer, and he was a tree planter. And when my mother was born, he planted a tree. And he's kind of OCD was one of his things. He also remade and repurposed discarded materials. So that tree became famous, and they called him Uncle Buck. Now he couldn't keep a job down, so this was his work. And my grandmother, she worked at Notre Dame, so she was like the breadwinner in the family. But those projects were interesting because uh, they looked at my grandfather as a teacher, even though he didn't graduate. I mean, he didn't even get out of eighth grade, but he was an avid reader. But he really loved the Bible, and one of his favorite uh, gospel texts is John 10:10. So my grandfather was known to help people out, kind of the neighborhood counselor. He wasn't much for church, but he was about the gospel. And they were like,
yeah.
"But we gonna gather around the tree that he had planted." Now my mother them they were teenagers at the time, and so they were staying on the peripheral of these elders discussing stuff. My after At the end of that, my grandfather would quote John 10:10, and then he would say, "No gift goes unused here."
Wow.
Now, the city of South Bend didn't treat them as sacred, but those neighbors there, they were a community center. They were the houses. It wasn't just my grandparents, it was all of those folks knew that they were needed. So that's the formation of that story. Now, I've heard that story like at least twice a month for all my life. And didn't realize that story, how much value that story until in 1999 when I met Mike Mather. He was just coming off sabbatical. I'm also really skeptical of pastors. The first thing that happens is they usually take you to the altar call right away. They assume, Anyway, that's
Yep.
just how it grew up. So I didn't want to really meet Mike. But then when I met Mike, uh, two magical things happened. I was like, this guy can't be the pastor.
So he was a pastor at Broadway Church in Indianapolis, Broadway Methodist.
No, this was when he was at Broadway
Oh, in
Christian
South
Church
Bend. That's right.
at South Bend. Mike loved Broadways. But anyway, and that's when I got to learn about you. But the magical thing that Mike did with me is affirmed. He asked me first, tell me your story. I want to hear it.
Yeah.
And it took several conversations. Man, he affirmed the story. And he was like, man, this is beautiful. And this is kind of me beginning of my like artistic space, joint. So yeah, so that's kind of where me and Mike start being kids on the playground together. And I think the biggest thing we shared is what does it mean to cultivate a beloved community, a community that everybody's gift is utilized and seen. And so later on, we lost a grant. I moved to Chicago, started teaching. Met my wife. We had kids, then we moved to Indianapolis. I always wanted to go back and work with Mike, and me and Mike still communicated. We hung out. He'd come see me. I said, Mike, I'm moving to Indianapolis. I know that's far from South Bend. He says, oh, I'm actually in Indianapolis. I'm back at Broadway for my second stint. But now he's a senior pastor. And the faith thing that happened really, the union rep for the railroad for Amtrak lived in the neighborhood where Broadway was, and that's where she suggested we live. I'm a stay-at-home dad with my 1-year-old daughter. I had a ritual with Mike in South Bend. On Mondays, I would come sit with him in the study and tell him stories. And I would tell him stories in Indianapolis about people I met in the neighborhood. And so a whole another thing that happened through some at Broadway United Methodist in Indianapolis, we were exploring what it means to be a good neighbor as a church. Before I feel like we had battled between being a good neighbor is meaning that we help folks with resources and stuff they don't have. And now we're saying, what does it mean to see the gifts of folks? So through that discernment, one of our members Sherry Johnson was working for the Community Development Corporation. And, they wanted to partner with Broadway so it would match resources. Mike said they just needed money. But one of the most brilliant moves I've seen was that Mike agreed to go with them, but he did two things. He said, we won't do a strategic plan based on needs. We're going to do something based on gifts and talents, and we get to hire the person. and what was more important, he said, also, I get to supervise that person.
Right.
Now, Mike ain't the greatest supervisor. I was never supervised by Mike Mather, which was so genius. Mike Mather himself is unsupervisable. So he saw that, but then he also came back to me. It's like, how would you like to get paid for what you already do? And I said, what is that? He said, I want you to continue finding the gifts, talents, dreams, and passions of everybody in the life of that community. Find a place for the gifts to be seen in ways that cultivate community, economy, and mutual delight. And I was like, dang, here we go. And so the name came up because it was a joke. My title in South Bend was the roving artist. We couldn't use the original name, the Animators of the Human Spirit, because it was confusing to the funders. And so me and Mike looked at each other. All right, how about the roving listener? So that's how that started. After some years of learning and success, and learning about what does it take that a church can't do this alone. I wondered what it would be like um, to do this with my neighbors with the same practices and infrastructure. And we did. There was a Presbyterian pastor and a few of my neighbors, January Loudstyle, Pichelle, January York, and Amanda, and then Fernando Rodriguez, who was kind of with us on along the way. And the idea was to create a company that my neighbors used their other currencies to cultivate community, their expertise, their gifts. And so they didn't have to put in money, and I would give them contracts, but in return, they would have to put 20% into a pot that we could make our own grants to people already doing the work.
Nice.
And they had to continue and walk the neighborhood with me. And we didn't have a name for it. I had, because of the work at Broadway, the connection with Mike and these other connections that were friendships that were developed. I asked him, can I bring my neighbors along on my work? Don't hire me. So anyway, so that's there. And then we're sitting on the porch one time and I'm struggling to figure out what we name this. And Fernando says to me, man, you tell this story about your granddad all the time. Let's call it the Learning Tree. And so that's how we got our names. And kind of our mission is to figure out how to seek goodness in the world. And how do we help institutions become good neighbors? So we're actually a consultant company that work with institutions to become good neighbors. But really, what we like to do is take the money and spread it out into people who need it.
To help institutions become good neighbors. You've mentioned John 10:10. I think I'm right. That's where Jesus says, "The thief comes to rob and to steal, but I have come to give you life and to give it to you in the fullest way, in abundance, to give you life abundantly."
That's
Wow.
that's what Granddad's quote was. That what he quoted. And you know who was the thieves in the time I was growing up? Saint Memorial Hospital, the city of South Bend. That's what they was talking about in that scripture when they said
So,
thieves.
so we're living in a time when the poor, the thief is, well, where does the thief not exist?
That's the truth.
Part of what you're sharing, the piece that I skipped over too quickly is you took 20% and set it aside to spread it in the community.
Yeah.
How'd you do that, with grants, or just with you saw opportunities, you saw initiative, you saw imagination? How was that distributed?
Well, a couple of things is that we had been through grant processes because we wanted to support stuff, and we realized that grant making isn't philanthropy. Total different thing, right? And we knew this because people would tell us that our the foundations would tell our response would be our project budget is too big for our operation budget. And it did. We cried when we got that response because we thought we were doing social good. Doesn't it mean that's how it's supposed to be? Anyway, so we started to think about uh, how do we got to go look for what we're hoping to see. First of all, that was the rule my team had to do. So they needed to be able to do the practice. Second, that meant we didn't do RFPs, requests for proposals. Like, because people were going to tell us what they thought we wanted to hear, and that's the game that get played. But we wanted to find the people doing the work already. Two, we would pop up with them and do a few things because when money, and we first of all we exaggerate it. We never gave more than $2,400. The average grant was about 300 to 500. Yeah, but when you think about like what people do, the people we would pick was philanthropic to a fault. They would spend their own money. They didn't get seen as philanthropists. And so we would do that, and they were skeptical. The big check were there, and they say, "What's the catch?" And the rule is there are three rules. You can't do what you do alone. That was something I got from Broadway and in this ecosystem. Uh, you can't do anything obscene or illegal. This is a Mike thing, but we'll stretch legality because slavery was once legal. The hoodlum priests, Mike Mather, thank you. And then as residents, you have to fail 3 times. So you can't do what you do by yourself. So you have to have 3 or more people. Um, you can't do anything obscene or illegal, but we'll stretch on the legality. And then you have to fail at least 3 times. Because my neighbors, black people, poor people, people with disability are penalized for failure. And we learned that. And that's what we wanted. Nobody failed if they used imagination. And they said, come back and tell us. So that's what we did. We funded a lot of stuff. we, you know, and the other reason we did that, we wanted to make sure when money came into our neighborhood, it came with a nurse or a steward, as if we needed bibs with money. Like we didn't know like how to handle money, and so we wanted to open up. We wanted one of our rules is money that must flow to the hands of people who need it.
Wow. Well, you have given us enough to think about for the rest of our lifetime. Um, and I want to let the listeners of this podcast know that we're going to talk again one day soon, and we're going to add the hoodlum priest, Michael Mather, to the conversation. Um, as De'Amon and I know, moving toward building off of the gifts, the assets of people of the genuine articles is a difficult thing to do in a world that's constructed so that most of the money goes to pay the salaries of people at the top. And to really get to a place where, what'd you say they were, the real philanthropists? They were the genuine philanthropists. They're
Yeah.
already investing themselves
Mm.
in the project. We're going to pick up on this in one of the next episodes. Right now, I know De'Amon has to head off to another responsibility. Man, you travel all over the world.
Yeah.
You're a gift to so many, and you've been a gift to us today. Thank you, De'Amon Harges, for being a part of the To Be and Do podcast. This is Phil Amerson with great gratitude for the opportunity to speak with my friend De'Amon, and we'll
Yeah.
do it again soon.